Your sourdough starter is a colony of yeast that is living inside a solution of flour and water. To feed the colony of yeast, you have to give it new flour and water. So what I do is every day, I dump about half of it down the sink drain. You can use it, but I don't have any use for it right now, so it can just go down the sink drain with some warm water. Then I will replace the flour and water in there in equal parts. So that's about 30 grams of flour and about 30 grams of water.
Let's get started on making our dough. When we're baking, we always want to use weight instead of volumetric measurements. Flour is easily compressible, so when you're using cups to measure flour, you can get very different amounts depending on how you measure it. We are using about 450 grams of flour total. I'm using 90% bread flour and about 10% whole wheat flour. We're using the bread flour for the texture and the whole wheat flour for just a little bit extra flavor.
320 grams of water here. For this part, you're going to want to take off any watches or rings or jewelry that you have because we are mixing the dough. You can do this with plastic wrap. I usually like to do it with a damp tea towel that's wetted with warm water. This will be more important later when we are trying to make sure that our dough stays warm so that the yeast can be a little bit more active.
1 hour of flour hydration later, and our bread is not a shaggy mess anymore. It's nice and supple. So the next thing we have to do is add our starter and our salt.
Going in with 70 grams of starter here, and I'd say it's okay to go a little bit over on this. If you're worried about your sourdough starter not being quite active enough, sometimes I will also add in just a little pinch of active dry yeast. Make sure we get those bubbles in the dough that we want. Some people might consider this cheating. I just call it insurance. And we're also going to add in 9 grams of salt. Sometimes the salt likes to stick together, so it's okay to add just a little splash of water to help dissolve it and make sure that it's incorporating like it's supposed to. We really want to make sure that the salt is getting incorporated everywhere, that it's not just concentrated, so make sure you're really mixing it around, working it in there. Once it seems like everything has been pretty well combined, it should be sticking to your hands a little bit at this point. We are going to cover it back up and let it rest for about 20 minutes. I have a clean area on my counter, a nice little floured area down there. And we're gonna take our dough and we're gonna start doing something called slap and folds. So what that means is we hold our dough like this, slap it down, fold it over. What you're looking for is you want to see it sticking to the counter there, and then you want to roll it back over. Then you want to pick it up from the top and bottom and rotate. So now what was the side is now the top, and it gets its own slap and fold and turn. This is going to go on for some time. I'm going to be at this for maybe 3 or 4 minutes. Now it goes back in its bowl to rest for about 20 minutes. Now that our dough has rested some, we are going to start our process of doing what we call stretch and folds. So stretch and fold is just another way to develop gluten, where we take an edge, pull it up, and fold it over. And we rotate around the bowl, make sure that all of our edges come off the bowl and get folded over, and then I will usually pick it up and flip it over so that the smoother side is facing up as well. And then we'll come back in another 15 minutes and do our second stretch and fold. It has been about 15 minutes, so we are going to go in with another set of stretch and folds. It is time for our third stretch and fold. It's been about 15 minutes. There is a lot of flexibility that comes with sourdough, and part of that is that you can add mix-ins. So I have measured out about 200 grams of mix-ins. I have 200 grams in mixed amounts of walnuts and chocolate chips in here. Dump those in with our bread, and we will continue with our stretch and fold process. It's gonna look like too many mix-ins, but that is all part of the process. All right, it's been another half hour, so it's time to do another set of stretch and folds. You want to see that the dough will stretch so that it's thin and that light can shine through it without breaking. And that's a good tell that your bread is ready. So we get a little bit of window pane there where the light is able to shine through, which means that our gluten is as developed as it's gonna get. So now we're gonna let this rest just a little bit longer. Now it's time for us to shape our loaf. So I will be using a banneton. It's a type of proofing basket, but if you don't have one, you can use a large mixing bowl with a tea towel laid inside of it, and that'll be just fine. It does pretty much the same thing. But before we can shape our loaf, we need to make sure that it's not going to stick inside of the banneton. So you need to dust down the inside with flour. I like to use rice flour. It is a little bit more non-stick than wheat flour, but you can really use any flour that you have and it'll work just fine for the job. I'm gonna take our dough here. I'm gonna just kind of work it around. So I'm kind of taking the edges and pulling them around toward the back side of the loaf. So I'm trying to have a smooth, unbroken surface on the exterior of the loaf. Now I'm going to set it down on our work surface here, and I'm just going to continue working it and trying to push everything toward the back of the loaf, like the underside here, so that it's all collecting and it's stretching out this exterior surface to make it smooth and unbroken. And once it is smooth to my likeness, I'm gonna scooch it in toward the inside, like squeeze these edges here, and just plop it in to my banneton. Go all the way to the edges of your banneton, but don't press too hard. There are some air bubbles in here right now, so we don't want to crush all of those air bubbles. I'm going to put it inside of a plastic grocery bag. So this helps keep a controlled environment inside while it's proofing. So from here, we have two different options. I could either put this in the fridge overnight and let it rise in the fridge, and then I could bake it in the morning, or I could just leave it out on the countertop until it is roughly doubled in size. I will be leaving mine out on the countertop to bake later today. So it has been about 3.5 hours since I set this out to rise. Since I can kind of indent it and it bounces back, but not all the way, that means that we are just about as risen as we need to be. So I am going to start preheating my oven. I always bake my bread in a Dutch oven. This is a little bit of a special Dutch oven that is meant more specifically for bread baking, but any Dutch oven will work as long as it does not have any plastic knobs on it. We need to make sure that they are oven safe. So I'm going to load those into an oven that is preheating to 500 degrees. We want this to be just about as hot as it will go. We will let these preheat in the oven for about 30 to 45 minutes. Now that my oven has been preheating for a while, we are just about ready to bake. We have our banneton. We have a sheet of parchment paper. We're gonna use this parchment paper kind of like a cradle. So, we can grab the sides and drop it down into the Dutch oven. And then when the baking is done, we can use them to pull it back out. And a little bit less likely that we burn our wrists on the side of the Dutch oven there. So I am going to put some flour down on this parchment paper to make sure that there's no sticking. I'm also going to flour this will end up being the underside of our loaf. So I'm gonna put some flour on this underside, and we'll wipe this off after it's done baking. I wanna make sure that all of these chocolate chips are nice and protected from the Dutch oven. Make sure that there's dough between the chocolate chips and the Dutch oven because they will burn. That is a beautiful looking loaf right there. Now, I'm gonna grab a sharp knife or a razor blade. This helps gases escape while the loaf is baking to make sure that we don't explode our loaf. You can do all kinds of fancy designs with these. I'm gonna keep it pretty simple here. You just wanna make sure that you're cutting about 1/2 inch deep. All right, this process gets a little bit hectic, so bear with me here. Things are moving fast and things are very hot. Now that we are all preheated, I'm gonna drop the temperature down to 450. Dutch ovens can be really heavy, so please be careful. We are going to lift this parchment paper, get it in the Dutch oven. I am going to grab a couple of ice cubes. I'm gonna stick them underneath the parchment paper. Gear back up. This goes in the oven, and the lid goes on. And that will stay in the oven for about 25 minutes. The reason we put the ice cube in there is because we want a steam environment in the oven. That helps keep the crust from forming for longer. It lets the loaf cook all the way through on the inside without having any risk of the crust burning. And then we'll take the lid off, which lets the steam escape, and we'll bake it for another 10 minutes after the lid is off. So we are ready to take the lid off of the Dutch oven. As you can see, the bread has puffed up quite a bit. We call that the oven spring because it springs up while it's in the oven. We're gonna drop the temperature about 25 degrees, so we're gonna go to 425, and we will leave it in for another 8 to 10 minutes until it's golden brown on the outside. Before you take it out, you always want to check and make sure that the color of the bread looks about right. Like I said, we want that golden brown color on there. It got a little bit darker on the edges there, but I think it'll be just perfect. So now we pull that off. We're gonna set it on the wire rack, and it has to cool down completely before we cut into it. So it'll be a couple of hours, but that is more or less how you make some sourdough bread.